Hey guys, my name's Nick. You can call me Eekfoil. And today I want to talk to you about Han Yellow in Jump to Lightspeed. So if you don't know who I am, I've been playing Han Yellow since set 2, since I saw Ian Klein and Troy Yamaguchi dominate at Gen Con. I picked the deck up shortly after, and I've been essentially solo maining it ever since. I've taken it to multiple PQs, gotten multiple PQ top 8 finishes with it, and I even wrote a article deck guide for the set 3 meta. I'll link that in the description. But all that to say is I have a lot of thoughts about Han Yellow. I've been playing it for a while, and I want to kind of take you guys through my deck building journey in the new set. First, I want to go through the new cards that I think could find a place in Han. I want to go through some of the new cards in Cunning Heroism that I think might be traps. And then I want to share 3 different lists that I think sort of encapsulate the 3 different deck building directions that Han Yellow is being pulled in this set. So let's get into it. So first, let's go over some of the new toys that Han is getting access to in this set. So going in order, we've got the new Falcon. This is a little redundant with the set 1 Falcon. Obviously, it's worse. It doesn't come in ready. And we don't have a pilot leader, so we're not taking advantage of the extra pilot ability or the +1 attack super consistently. However, what's very important about this card is that it is a rebel, and certain versions of Han Yellow really care about the rebel tag. There are a lot of versions running around that run Fleet Lieutenant and Wing Leader trying to take advantage of that package. And this is the first good rebel unit in space. Before this, all we had access to was like Alliance X-Wing. And that doesn't allow us to take advantage of the typical Han game plan of ramping on turn 1, dropping a 3-drop unit to get ahead on board early and get a favorable trade. Stolen AT Hauler is another 3-drop space unit. Obviously, this guy is way overstated for its cost, but it has a pretty significant downside. If your opponent is able to defeat it, they can just play it for free. So this is sort of a high-risk, high-reward card. The thing that makes this work in Han is the fact that we have access to so many bounce effects. So even if our opponent is able to steal it, we're able to return it to our hand and sort of like recoup somewhat some of the disadvantage. And this gets a lot better if you have a new adventure specifically in your deck, because a new adventure allows you to return it to your hand and then replay it immediately for free. So if your opponent steals it, you get it back under your control immediately for just 2 resources. And I think this interaction, combined with the fact that a new adventure was already a pretty good card in Han Yellow, sort of enables this like a new adventure build around like when played tribal deck that's just spamming when played effects and runs a bunch of a new adventure to take advantage of it. Whoops. So next we have the pilot Han Solo, and I really like this guy because he's a modal card, and I think the flexibility of being able to play him as basically a textless Bosk, a 4/5 ambusher on the ground, or as a pilot. And he's one of the better pilots because he has that action compression, sort of like a hotshot blaster in space. And we're a Han Solo deck. Obviously, we run Millennium Falcon. So if we're playing this on a space unit, it is most likely going to be the Millennium Falcon. So we're going to be able to take advantage of that shoot first ability quite frequently if we're playing him as a pilot. So the other pilot I think is worth looking at is Mandalorian. Not so much for his piloting ability. You know, the +3/+1 and the exhaust is decent, but what is more interesting to me is his ability as a ground unit. First of all, 5/6 for 5 on the ground is pretty good. You know, that's almost post stats. But the ability to exhaust 2 ground units when played is like half of the cunning, which is super strong if in the right scenario. This guy in my testing, he has seemed a little worse in practice than he looks on paper, just because the units we want to exhaust are usually in the arena we're not already strong in. So if we are already strong in the ground, we usually want to exhaust our opponent's space units, and the Mandalorian doesn't really allow that to happen. But I think, when he's good, he's very good. So I still think he is worth looking at. And then we have Ahsoka, the good Ahsoka, not the set 3 Ahsoka. That was a disappointing card, to say the least. But this version of Ahsoka is really good. She's not as good as she is in something like Quinlan Tarkentown, because we don't take advantage of the Force trait. However, Han already runs a bunch of discard effects and hand hate, and while this is not a targeted discard effect like the rest of the cards Han runs, it is, an additional discard effect. And in certain games, if you play enough of those, you just reach a critical mass where your opponent is forced to play in top deck mode in a pretty early point in the game. A very nice thing about her in a double yellow deck is that you get to pair her with Bodhi Rook. If you play Bodhi first, you get to look at their hand and take the event out of their hand. Then, if you follow it up with Ahsoka, hopefully they don't have any more events because you got rid of the events they already had with Bodhi. And that way you are guaranteeing you get the exhaust off with a lot higher frequency. Next, let's look at some cards I think are maybe enticing at first, but I think are actually traps. And mainly it's these new 2 7-drop ships that we got access to in Yellow Heroism. Tentative 4 is, a chunky space sentinel that comes with a second body. It's a rebel. The X-Wing it generates is also a rebel. So these are all things that we could potentially take advantage of. However, I think it just comes too late in the game. Obviously, any 7-drop is worth giving a look at in a Han deck, because Han's whole gimmick is ramping from 5 resources to 7 resources using his leader ability. So we are able to cheat these out 2 turns early. However, I think it's just too slow. The tentative, it's a very defensive card. It is best into something like a Django Tarkentown deck, where they go pretty wide in space pretty aggressively. But it's very awkward into that deck, and we'll go into the specifics of the Django matchup in a bit, but Django just has so many exhaust effects for our flip turn nowadays that we are very rarely getting to 7 resources on the Han flip turn. And so we're never cheating this out 2 turns early. We're maybe able to cheat it out a turn early, but in my experience, that's usually too late. And I think it's just better to do something more aggressive. Now, Radiant 7 is a more aggressive space unit. The 5 indirect is nothing to scoff at, and it has the, self synergy, where if your opponent chooses to put that indirect damage on their units, then their units get smaller. I just think it is not necessarily what the Han deck is trying to do. This is like the only indirect damage effect that we would have in our deck if we ran it. Han doesn't typically run any other indirect damage deck effects. Most of that is like a yellow villain type of thing, not a yellow heroism. And so indirect damage is like a mechanic that gets better the more redundancy you have of it. So I just don't think this is what Han is trying to do, even though it can have some pretty explosive turns. And to follow it up, we've got Jam Communications. Now, I think Jam Communications is a great card in something like a Kazuda deck, where you're going very aggressive, very low curve, and you care a lot about resource efficiency. So this, compared to Spark Rebellion, it costs half the cost. However, you can only discard events from it, not upgrades and not units, obviously. I think it is too hard to fit a card like this in a Han Solo deck because we already trade card advantage for tempo. So it is very difficult to fit multiple cards into a turn a lot of the time. And so a one cost event like this just becomes pretty awkward in a Han deck because if we have too many of these, then we just run out of cards in hand to do anything meaningful with. We might not be able to ramp to deploy our leader if we get hit by a discard effect. And I think the discard we already have access to between Spark, Bodhi, Kira, and the new Ahsoka card, I think is enough. I don't think the Han deck needs something like Jam Communications. But I won't stop you from playing it if you really want to. Okay, so before we get into the deck lists themselves, I want to kind of go over the problems that I see arising in the early meta that I'm going to be looking to solve with the deck builds. So the first one is Django Tarkin Town. You know it, you love it. You probably don't love it unless you're a Django player. You probably hate it. But if you have played against this deck at all, you know how powerful the Django and War Juggernaut interaction is. If Django's deployed and they play a War Juggernaut, or an IG-2000 for that matter, they can essentially tap down the entire board. And so racing Django got a hell of a lot harder because of this. And also, playing the control role into Django got much harder because they now have access to Devastator, which is a huge bomb they can pull off a triple dark raid or sneak attack in. And they're just now able to burst for massive amounts of damage at once. So we need a plan to address this. And the best way to stop the board-wide exhaust is to just get rid of Django Leader. Just kill him. And in order to do this, you're going to need to count to 7 damage. The most straightforward way is to use Surprise Strike on a 4-attack unit. That is the only one action option we have to kill Django. More often than not, you're going to find yourself sinking 2 attacks into him to get him dead, like any 3-attack unit plus a 4, or I really like the new ambushing Han for this, because we have so many units with 3 attack, we can send one into Django and then ambush him with Han to clean him up before he's able to get a War Juggernaut out. And it is important to note that because Django has access to so many new tap effects, it is very hard to get to 7 resources on the Han flip turn against Django. So we shouldn't be expecting to be able to get off a 7 drop like a set 1 Han or an Emphy's Nest or a DJ on the flip turn against Django. We're going to have to delay those if we're able to play them at all. And so I think spending 5 resources on our flip turn for something like an ambushing Han is a pretty good play. So the other thing that we can bring in for this matchup is Commandeer. Now, I really like this against specifically War Juggernaut, because War Juggernaut has line of text. This unit gets +1 attack for each damage unit. Typically, what Django players will do is they will ping every single unit on your side of the board. And additionally, they'll probably ping a couple of theirs, including the War Juggernaut itself, just to bump its attack. Especially if they're playing it off of a sneak attack or a triple dark raid when it comes in ready. They're going to want to get as much damage in as possible. And so typically you'll see these War Juggernauts getting to pretty high attack values if there are enough units on the board to support it. Now, the beautiful thing about this is if you save a Commandeer in hand for waiting for them to play War Juggernaut, they play it and they get up to 7 attack, you can steal it with Commandeer and use it to kill Django. And that solves both problems at once, you know, like dealing with the huge tank they just played and killing Django, so they're not able to replay the War Juggernaut and tap down your entire board again the next turn. And yeah, that's why we have to look into specific answers for this, is because our typical game plan would just be to interact with it by bouncing it. But obviously that doesn't work if we leave Django alive, because they can just exhaust us over and over as long as we keep bouncing it. All right, now the other big shift in the meta is the introduction of pilot leaders. So any Kazudas, any Lukes, Darth Vaders, Wedges, Boba Fett's, these all pose the same problem of getting a leader unit onto a ship, and any leader unit cannot be returned to hand. So our bounce effects, like Waylay and Cantina Bouncer, don't work versus pilot leaders. Additionally, there's still a bunch of upgrades in the meta, like, you know, just pilot cards like Chewbacca. Still a lot of wing leader action going around. Sabines are still running Darksaber. Now, there's one card in Yellow Heroism that answers every single one of these problems, and I think you probably know what it is already. That card is Bamboozle. Bamboozle is cracked into this meta. At the cost of 0 resources, potentially, Bamboozle allows you to exhaust a unit and return each upgrade on it to its owner's hand. Now, the beautiful thing about this is that when a pilot deploys onto a ship, it becomes a leader upgrade. And leaders cannot be returned to their owner's hand because they exist in the leader zone, right? They don't go to your hand ever. And so there's a specific rule that says if a leader would ever be returned to hand, defeat it instead. So what this does, if you play this on a ship with a pilot leader on it, is that it exhausts the ship and it just kills the leader for 0 resources. So this allows you to do really stupid things, like as long as you have 3 cards in your hand, you're able to spend your resources on one of them and then just pass with 0 resources up until they decide to deploy their leader, and then you just use Bamboozle, discard the other card in your hand, and absolutely blow them out. So now that we've talked about the problems in the meta we're looking to address, I want to give you 3 different lists that kind of take Han in different directions using the new Jump to Lightspeed cards. So first, we're going to have a list that's focused on hand hate. Next, we're going to have the list I alluded to earlier when I was talking about the Stolen AT Hauler that focuses on taking advantage of when played effects with a new adventure. And then we're going to have a set for Han Rebels list. All right, so let's talk about the hand hate list. So Han has always had access to the very powerful curve of Spark of Rebellion into Bodhi, into Kira, but now Jump to Lightspeed adds Ahsoka as another option in the 4-drop slot to that curve. When you're able to do this against your opponents, it can be pretty backbreaking to them, just stripping their hand 3 turns in a row. So the turn 1 Spark is the most sort of like influx aspect of this line. You usually only want to be playing Spark on turn 1 if you have initiative, and only into certain decks. Opponents are able to play around it by keeping multiple turn 1 units, but you're able to get away with this a lot of the time if you start the game with initiative, and just sort of prevent your opponent from doing anything meaningful in the first 3 turns of the game. And so, you know, just adding Ahsoka into the deck makes the consistency with which you can pull off this like 3-card combo a lot higher. And I mean, I think it was worth just building a deck around with 3 of all of these cards and just trying to take advantage of this. So here's the list I got. Let me move my camera. All right, so you can see the sideboard. So yeah, you can see we've got 3 Spark Rebellions, 3 Bodhi Rooks, 3 Kiras, and 3 Ahsokas in here. That is the main thing this version of the deck is trying to do. Other than that, it's a pretty typical good stuff Han. We're running not the Rebel package. Instead, we've got the L3s and the Liberated Slaves. I have Bamboozles in the main because, like we discussed, I think it is, a good meta call. So you can see in the sideboard, I've got the 2 Commandeers for the Django matchup. And I've also threw in 2 of the new Pilot Han Solo because I've just been liking that card in testing. So the one of Ezra in here is really a flex slot. Honestly, that could be your 3-drop of choice, or you could even swap it out for something like a Gamorrean Guard or a 3rd Han unit, 3rd Cantina Bouncer, whatever you want. I just put an Ezra in there because I like having redundancy in the 3-drop slot. Okay, now let's get into the A New Adventure list. So this is a new adventure. It reads, for 2 resources, it allows you to return a non-leader unit that costs 6 or less to its owner's hand. Then its owner may play it for free. So these are all the cards that Han has access to that synergize with A New Adventure. It's a lot of them. So the 3 cards that were already core in Han before set 4 that A New Adventure takes advantage of are the Millennium Falcon, Bodhi Rook, and Cantina Bouncer. Each of these have great win plate effects, and in the Falcon's case, it enters play ready, so you're able to play it, attack with it, then play A New Adventure. It comes in ready and get another attack with it. Set 4 adds a lot of great options that synergize with this card, namely the Soul and AT Hauler, as we sort of discussed earlier. If your opponent is able to defeat this guy, they get to play it for free under their control, which sucks. But if we have A New Adventure, then we are able to, for 2 resources, kill their copy of it and play another copy under our control. So that is just ultra resource efficiency. Yes, we are like mitigating a downside imposed by one of our own cards, but I think it's still a very powerful interaction. And so Han was already able to take advantage of A New Adventure on Bodhi, doubling up on those discard effects. But now with the addition of Ahsoka, that is just another unit that has a discard effect on a win played ability. And so you're really able to chain these like multiple discard effects in a row and get your opponent down to like 1 to 0 cards in hand to where they're in top deck mode. So A New Adventure obviously also works really well with ambush units. I think the new Pilot Han in his ambush mode is pretty good here. I didn't include them in the slide, but this also works with stuff like the 6-drop Lando's Falcon. Since A New Adventure returns it to hand, it gains ambush when played from hand, and also things like the 6-drop Imphy's Nest that has ambush, Syndicate Lackeys too. And the other one is the Mandalorian, who, when he's played as a ground unit, has a very powerful win played ability if we're in a racing situation on the ground. All right, so this is the list I built. Let me move my camera again. Okay, so you can see I have 3 A New Adventure in here, and I've got the Soul and AT Haulers, the Bodhis, the Ahsokas, 3 Cantina Bouncers, only 1 Mandalorian in here. Wanted to try to fit 2, but when you're adding extra cards, like 3 copies of A New Adventure, it can be a little hard to find space for everything you want. So you can see in this version, I have both Spark of Rebellion and Bamboozle in the sideboard, and that is just like a concession you have to make when you are going for a synergy package like this. You're gonna have to concede something, and in that case, a new adventure is sort of acting like a pseudo Spark Rebellion when we're playing it with Bodhi Rook or Ahsoka. And Bamboozle is extremely good into matchups where it's good, but in a lot of matchups, it's not really doing too much. It's mainly just like an exhaust effect in a lot of matchups. So I think putting it in the sideboard is perfectly fine if you don't expect pilots to be everywhere at your event. Okay, and last but certainly not least, we've got Rebels Han. So, if you didn't already know, this is the Rebels package that some Han Yellow decks were taking advantage of. Fleet Lieutenant and Wing Leader are the payoffs. Both have very powerful when played effects that require Rebel units to be in play. Ezra Bridger, Bodhi Rook, and Rogue Operative are all solid 3-drop Rebels that Han is able to play on turn 1, followed up with a Fleet Lieutenant or a Wing Leader, and just have a very aggressive start right out the gate. And you'll notice all of these cards cost 3. That's where C3PO comes in. In a Rebels deck, we're able to construct the deck to where almost, if not more than half the deck is made up of 3-cost cards, so that when we're playing C3PO, he has about a 50% chance of drawing a card if we just name 3. And C3PO is also a Rebel, so you're able to slap a Wing Leader buff on him, make him a 3/6, and he's able to actually trade meaningfully into units. So what does set 4 add to the strategy? Mainly, it's a new Falcon. Finally, a good Rebel space unit. And this is pretty huge because we're able to play this on turn 1. We're able to Wing Leader it up, make it into a 5/6. And unless your opponent has their own turn 2 upgrade play, which albeit is pretty common now in Jump to Lightspeed, a turn 2 Chewbacca will outmatch a Wing Leadered up Falcon. But if your opponent doesn't have something like that, it's a very strong, very aggressive start. And I think, just having the flexibility to go with the Rebel synergy in space, being able to keep a Wing Leader or a Fleet Lieutenant in your hand when you want to start space and contest the space arena on turn 1, just that is very powerful. I want to give a shout out to the pilot Han here, because not only is he a Rebel himself, but when you pilot him onto the set 4 Millennium Falcon, the Millennium Falcon gets +3 power, putting it to 6 power, and that's a very important breakpoint, because you're able to kill stuff like Ruthless Raider, like Fett's Fire Spray, without taking damage back, because Han gives the Falcon the shoot first ability. So I think, these cards were designed to work well together, and if you're running a Rebels version, I think you should take advantage of this interaction. Now, the other more spicy interaction I've got over here is Boshek. So Boshek isn't a Rebel. He doesn't synergize directly. However, you might remember I mentioned that Rebels versions are trying to spam a bunch of 3-cost units to make C3PO good. Well, 3 just so happens to be an odd cost, and Han also loves to run 7-drops, and there are also a lot of good 5-drops like Han Solo and Cantina Bouncer. So the deck ends up having a lot of odd-cost units without us even really having to try too hard to make Boshek good. And if you're able to get him out as a pilot, drawing potentially 2 cards is extremely powerful in a deck like Han, who is able to leverage those cards to turn them into extra resources whenever he wants, or to just refill his hand after he's dumped it. So I think Boshek is not essential to a Rebels deck, but he's still a 3/4 ground unit that you can play on turn 1. And I think the odd cost synergy just makes sense with Rebels. So here's a list. So you can see Let me count. I should have done this math beforehand. But in terms of even cards, we've got 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Only 11 even cost cards in the main deck. So that gives, if I was a professional, I would have done this math beforehand. Okay, 39 out of 50. Okay, so that's a 78% hit rate with Boshek. That's pretty damn good, I think. And that's a 78% chance for him to hit an odd cost card for each card he discards. So you can see that I've opted to omit Ezra Bridger from this version, which might be controversial. But however, Bochek is kind of filling that role as a 3/4 3-drop on the ground. He's not a rebel himself, but if you just need a 3/4, he'll get the job done. Taking advantage of set 4 Falcon and set 4 Pilot Han, we've opted to include Zori Bliss over Lando's Falcon because her printed cost is 5, so she makes Boshek a little bit better. And yeah, other than that, we're drawing a bunch of cards with C-3PO, drawing some extra cards with Boshek, and yeah, just going fast with Fleet Lieutenants and Wing Leaders. All right, guys, that's all I had for today's video. I want to say a huge thank you for watching if you made it to the end. This is the first Star Wars Unlimited video I've made on this channel. I hope to make a lot more in the future. If you have any feedback for me, please throw it in the comments section. I would love to hear, your thoughts on Han Yellow or anything else you have to say. And also, I have an announcement that I am going to be getting into streaming this next week. March 24th through the 26th, Monday through Wednesday, I'm going to be prepping for a tournament I have coming up next week, the Bothan Invitational in Atlanta. And I figured I might as well stream some of my prep. So I'm going to be streaming right here on this YouTube channel. So if you're interested and if you have the time, come hang out and catch me playing some Han Yellow live at 3 p.m. Central Time, Monday through Wednesday next week. All right, guys. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good one.